It's that time. It's my favorite time where I get to read some new indie fantasy books. Yep, we're going to be talking about my SPFBO reads for the first round. You guys may know that I am a helper judge for Cassidy from Covers with Cassidy. She's an official judge and she has 6 of us that help her read her initial 30 books for SPFBO 10. If you have no clue how SPFBO works, essentially this year there was a lottery where everyone was able to submit for a 24-hour period. Then there were 300 books that were randomly selected from everything submitted. Those 300 were split across 10 judges and they were each given 30 books. And then for Cassidy's team, the 6 of us were each given 10 books apiece, where we will all read to try to figure out who our semi-finalist is going to be to give to Cassidy to choose as a finalist. So essentially the different thing about our team versus some of the other teams is that each book is read by 2 people. So not only am I going to be reading all of these books, but someone else on her team is going to be reading it as well. Not everyone gets the same 10 books, so it is kind of mixed around. This just hopefully gives the book the most fair shot. Some people just have very different taste. I know what I like and I know what I don't like, but that may be different than someone else's, and the goal is to try to give each book a very fair shot at entering into the competition. With that being said, any book that does not make semi-finalist for me in this vlog does not necessarily mean that it has been cut. I will direct you down to Mark Lawrence, who hosts this entire thing. I should have already said that. Down to his blog, which I will leave in the description box, where it will have all of the official cuts and semi-finalists, because someone else is going to be reading this. So if their vlog or their pick has not already come out yet, every book that I mentioned could still be in the running for semi-finalist. So I think that that is all of the nitty gritty. I felt like I made that a very winded explanation, but I'm so excited to get started. I have a pretty good batch of books and I can't wait to see what's going to end up being my semi-finalist. I don't really have any predictions. I'm going into everything with a very open mind, hoping to love everything that I read. I think I'm going to start with Goddess Found, so let's jump into my first read. Time for my first SPFBO update. I am about a quarter of the way into Goddess Found by Calanthe Colt, and this is about the god incarnate Jack, who has agreed to go on this reality TV show in order to find his goddess incarnate. And it's kind of like The Bachelor. And then one day Maribel, who is the seer for the show, which I think is kind of like the Jesse Palmer of The Bachelor, comes to her mom's shop for something, meets her and says that she's seen her and she just knows that she is supposed to come help with this. So she gets Leah to come and work on the show, and that's really all I've gotten to so far. I will say that I'm not really hooked on it. The writing is generally fine, but the characters just haven't gotten a lot of depth for me right now, and I feel like I'm not really seeing a lot of the plot. We're focusing a lot on the show itself and why there is a show, but I also don't feel like I'm understanding the world or why there really is a show or why there is a god or how any of the magic and stuff works in the first place. We're talking about the magic system and how there is everyone has magic but Leah doesn't, and that's a big deal, but I also don't really feel like I fully get it. This book is 377 pages and I'm not really sure what we've been doing for the first 25%, to be honest. I do think that this is going to be one of those books that really needs to hone in on the characters and focus on their relationship, because it's feeling more like a contemporary romance to me than it is a fantasy book, which is fine. It definitely has fantasy elements, so I think that it belongs in the competition, but I think that if it would lean into the contemporary romance side of things a little bit more, then it would work really well in this type of setting, and it would work really well for a contemporary romance reader that wants to get into fantasy. I don't think it's going to be the book for me because of that, but I think that that's where this book's going to find its footing. So I'm going to continue on and see if it does eventually get there. For now, those are really the things that aren't my favorite, but I can see how it can definitely get there. I finished my first book of SPFBO 10. I'm so excited. And this one was very middle of the road for me. I think that Goddess Found is going to be very appealing to those readers that are looking for something very cozy. It feels like a warm hug kind of throughout the whole book. It is very even though there are some moments where I'm those characters are not great. Those characters are kind of not diabolical, but terrible in the way that reality TV TV show producers we all know are. The whole book just still feels very, very cozy. Our main characters, there's nothing super toxic about either one of them. They are just very down-to-earth individuals, and so it just definitely has a very cozy undertone. With that being said, I think it's going to appeal really well to romance readers. I don't think that this is going to appeal super strongly to a lot of epic fantasy readers. I think that if you are a cozy fantasy reader, it could still work for you, but I do still believe it's going to work better for a romance reader than even a cozy fantasy reader, just because it is a fantasy like subplot. The whole thing is about like a god trying to find his goddess, but in like if you took out all of the fantasy elements, you would still very easily have a story and it would be a romance. So I think that that is where I'm like, I just believe that it would work better for a romance reader, which I am not. Like, I am a fantasy romance reader, but not as much so a contemporary romance reader. I will stand by the fact that I think the characters need to be a lot more fleshed out. I think I would have enjoyed this much more if I felt like there was a lot of depth, because I just never really felt like there was a lot of chemistry between the two of them. And that was the whole point. It's a romance. I needed to feel like they wanted to be together. And there really wasn't a lot of page time in this 375 page book of them really like getting to be together. I don't know. I felt like there was just not a whole lot going on for the book to have been as long as it was. So for me, this was just going to be very middle of the road. I'm going to give this one a 5 for characters, a 5.5 for plot, a 5 for world building, a 6 for writing, and a 5 for enjoyment. That is a wrap on my first book for SPFBO 10. I don't know what I'm going to be moving on to next. Perhaps Blood of the Stars. I think that we're going to be doing a buddy read of this one, and I'm just excited to be moving on to my next read. Okay, quick update time for you guys, because I have gotten about 20% into A Blood in the Stars, and I'm enjoying this one. It is following Prince Garen, who as a child, he was given the task of protecting Eliana, and she was taken from him 14 years ago. We're fast forwarding now to 14 years later, where she is in the hands of the rebellion, and her blood is being used to do unspeakable things. In this world, we have the half-lights and humans. Half-lights have magic and they worship the sun god, and humans worship the stars, but I think that they are kind of intertwined together. We have a lot of different magic in this world. There is a rebellion plotline, it seems like, coming in. But basically, when she and Garen get together, they are on the hunt to rescue her mother from Mavis, who is a priestess that is trying to take over the realm. I think that that's pretty much the plot of this so far. I'm 20% in, but I guess we haven't really settled fully into the plot because this book is long. It's like 700 pages, so it does take a little bit to get going. Right now, I'm really interested in the world and the magic. It's different from a lot of things that I've read from before. I definitely prefer Eliana's point of view to Garen's. His is more like, I lost this girl 14 years ago and now I need to go find her. And even though I read the prequel, it's still, his motives don't still feel fully fleshed out, other than he feels guilty for losing her, but he was also like 8 years old at the time, and so I'm like, I just don't feel like, I don't know, it just, the motives don't fully make sense to me. However, I get it enough that I'm kind of looking past that and moving on. And then Eliana's point of view I really like, because that's where we're getting a lot of the magic and adventure right now. I will say that at the current moment there is a lot of tell not show, which is kind of aggravating. It's like they meet someone and then they word vomit everything that they need to know, and anytime something happens it just gets explained to them in very matter-of-fact terms. They're not having to find anything out for themselves, and I just want there to be a little bit more showing me how things work in this world, rather than something happening and them going, yep, that's the way this works, because I want to learn and understand and find out more for myself rather than just being told everything all of the time. So I'm hoping that that does start to intertwine a little bit better. It's just, I think it's taking it some time to find its footing. However, I am still enjoying it. I'm intrigued. I want to keep reading. I think that it is pretty well written overall. I definitely think that there has been a lot of time put into editing this. And so I'm excited to continue on and hopefully see it grow and strengthen the further we get into the book. So I'm going to change clothes because I am about to walk the pup. He is being very needy and wants to go right now. But I quickly wanted to give you guys a short update because I've made it past the halfway mark in Blood of the Stars, and I think that this book is definitely getting stronger as we go. The first half needed a lot of tightening up, but I think in the second half it's really started to find its footing. I'm interested in the world. I think the plot is going to kick off and really pick up. I'm having a lot of fun with this book. I feel like it's compelling even though it's too long. I'm excited to pick it up. I understand the characters and I like the character dynamics, and I'm excited to see where it's headed. We're making some progress. I've now finished Blood of the Stars, and I ended up really liking this one. I think that it is a big, sprawling epic, but it definitely feels very young adult, coming of age as well. It does remind me a lot of Masters of the Void from last year. There's just something about the tone of it, even though the stories are vastly different. I think this book shines in a lot of its character work, honestly, although there were some moments where I didn't fully understand their motivations or where characters kind of got on my nerves, but overall, I think the characters were really fleshed out and well done. And I think that the writing is really strong. You can tell that there was a lot of like work and effort put into making sure that this was a structurally good book. So I really enjoyed the writing and the flow of that as well. Also liked the world and the magic system. I enjoyed the fact that there was like stars and sun, the different magics and how everything kind of had an opposite side to it. I didn't love the like branding bonding thing, but I understand why it was there. And I think that the idea was pretty well fleshed out. The thought of like blood magic and dark spirits, all of that was just very intriguing and different to me. So I did enjoy the magic system. The thing that I think this book struggled with the most was in like the plot and the pacing. I did like the plot, but it took significantly longer than I feel like it should have to rev up to the plot. We did a lot of setup in the beginning. It took a really long time to get through that. And then once we got a little bit more into the plot base, everything did pick up and start moving a lot faster, but it took 400 pages to get there. So I think that the pacing definitely needed a little bit of work. Overall, I enjoyed this book a lot, and it could potentially be a contender for semi-finalist. I'm so glad that I enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it for young adult epic fantasy fans because I think that it was a lot of fun. So I just realized that I did not give you guys the good news, and we didn't go through all of my ratings for Blood of the Stars. So really quickly, I wanted to roll through these with you guys. The characters are gonna get an 8 for me, even at times when I wanted to thump some of them upside the heads and tell them to just get their crap together and get over themselves. I did still really enjoy the characters, and I felt like I understood their motivations and why they were doing the things that they were. The plot is also going to get an 8 for me. This one I struggled a little bit between a 7.5 and an 8 just because of the pacing in the front half of the story. I do feel like it could have been tightened up a pretty good bit, but overall I enjoyed the plot and I thought that it really hammered home in the ending and in the second half of the story. The world building I'm also going to give an 8. I really enjoyed the magic in here. There were definitely parts that I felt like I could have understood a little bit better, but I also got the sense that this author is one that is going to intentionally give you more information about things as you go along, and she didn't want to give all of it in the very beginning and show the hand too early, so to speak. So I'm going to trust in the process, and I really enjoyed what we got. The star magic and the way that they can level up and how blood magic plays into it. I really enjoyed all of those aspects. The writing, I'm going to give an 8.5. I do think it was very well written. I enjoyed it. I was always excited to pick it back up. Felt like I was engaged and in it with the characters. And enjoyment, I'm also going to give an 8.5. I just really enjoyed this. Like I said, wanted to pick it back up and was always finding myself having a good time, even in the parts that I did feel like were a little bit too long. Overall, this is going to get an 8.25, which is a 4-star read for me, and I'm so excited that I enjoyed this one. So next up, I think we're going to be moving into Rematch the Titan. This is one I'm a little bit scared of because I've never read a pro wrestling inspired fantasy before, and I'm not sure how it's gonna go. I have read Combat Codes, which is a combat, I forget what style of combat it's based off of, but I really enjoyed that one, and so I'm hoping this will give me similar vibes. I read the first couple of pages, and it's definitely giving me like man beating the chest vibes, but I think that it could settle down, and once it really settles into the plot, turn into something that I enjoy. So I'm optimistic, and we're gonna see how it goes. I'm a bad booktuber and I didn't give you guys an update on Rematch the Titans at all while I was reading it, but I have finished Rematch the Titan by Samuel Gatley. I ended up liking this one more than I thought. It's following Scott Flawless. He is the best of the best. He is the hot stuff when it comes to being a Titan. He never loses a fight and he knows how good he is. One day, for reasons, he has to leave the place where he is always known, get swept into the far corners of the open nations, and then has to help some unlikely people with a task that might just involve a necromancer. The first half of this book, I did struggle a pretty good bit with the characters and the writing. It just felt so very, I am the man, I am amazing, don't touch my hair, I'm too sexy for my shirt kind of feeling. But as we continued on in the book and the plot started to pick up, we started to understand Scott's character a little bit more. I found myself to be having a good time. I do wish this had given me just a touch more combat codes. I was hoping that we would learn more about the world and the culture and how the Titans came to be and why they are the way that they are, and there would be a little bit more like combat in it. Not really what this book is. I don't know if it's because it's technically the third book in a series, it's like a companion, if that stuff was explained earlier in the book, or if it is just because that's not really what this book was hoping to be. I liked that we got a decent amount of Scott's backstory. I felt like generally it was well written. The plot did lack just a little bit for me, especially since it really didn't come in until the second half, and this is only a 200-page book. So for the ratings for this one, I think I'm gonna give the characters a 7. I, again, felt like I did start to learn and understand Scott as a character more as we went along. I didn't love him. He's not necessarily the most likable of characters, but I do feel like I understood a decent amount of his motivations. I wish that the side characters had been a little bit stronger, so that's why I was kind of waffling between a 6 and a 7 on characters, because I think that they really could have used a bit more fleshing out, especially the ones that come in the second half. But overall, I think that the characters were pretty well done. I'm gonna give the plot a 6.5. This is part of where I feel like the book struggled a little bit, just finding its footing and finding its pacing. The world building, I'm gonna give a 6. I just, like I said before, wish that we had understood the world a little bit better. I wish that I had fully gotten the setting. I definitely could see the pro wrestling inspiration, which I think is a big point of this book, so I do think that part was done well. I just wish that I had understood like the magic and how the Titans worked a little bit better. I'm gonna give the writing a 7. I think for the most part, the writing was good. It definitely needed to be a little bit more polished in the beginning, but he found his footing as he went along. And then for the enjoyment, I'm also going to be giving that a 6.5, which comes out to a total of a 6.58 and a 3-star read. So not too bad. I will say that I don't recommend the audiobook. I think he leans a little too hard into the dumb pro wrestler like voices, which was not my favorite. And there were a few formatting things where like the volume would go up and down, which was kind of frustrating. But overall, I liked this one. It was a pleasant surprise. Ooh, that sun is bright, so let's see if I can tolerate it long enough to give you guys an update. Hopefully, yeah, this may not work. Anyway, maybe you'll see this clip, maybe you won't, but I have started the Oathsworn Legacy, and I'm a little on the fence about it. I wasn't aware when I started it that it's basically like each chapter is its own short story, and then theoretically they're all supposed to come together at the end and make sense as to how they all fit together in the story. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to happen. We're going to see, but I was not expecting basically every chapter to be its own short story. It's not typically my preferred way of reading a book, even if it all comes together in the end, but I'm hoping that the ending really wows me and that it's fine. It reminds me of like the first couple of books of The Witcher, where like it has its own short story as it's introducing you into Geralt and his character, and it honestly reminds me a lot of The Witcher in kind of its style too. We've got two brothers that are the best of the best, and they are off seeking monsters to hunt and kill, and they're getting different jobs, and basically this is the jobs that they're carrying out. So it does feel very Witcher in that way, except these two brothers are a little more on the humorous side. They don't take life too seriously, whereas Geralt is definitely a very serious character. I don't love the humor part of it. I wish that they were a little bit more serious, because it's definitely a brotherly type picking relationship, but it's just a little too much at times. I cannot count how many times I have been told that they are the best of the best, and I'm less than 100 pages in. So I do kind of wish that that would tone down a little bit, but overall I think the writing is pretty good, and the stories have been interesting. They're just very short and not meshing together very well. So each individually is fine. I just want them to come together more. So we'll see how everything ends up. Hopefully it'll wrap up nicely. Time for an update because I have finished the Oathsworn Legacy and I ended up really enjoying this. I don't know if I told you what this was about, but basically it's following two brothers and they are monster hunters and they are going off on different quests to slay a bunch of monsters. They're like swords for hire. One day they open a can of worms that they really shouldn't have opened and they now have to deal with a immoral evil, essentially. I liked this so much more than I thought I was going to. This book had several not Mel things. It has a little bit of humor. The way that it's told is kind of in snippets, at least in the beginning, that feel almost like short stories. And then it is a very, very, very classic fantasy. However, it worked pretty well for me. I think that the brotherly relationship and the characters really started to develop as we went throughout the story and I was learning more about them and how their dynamics work together. I think that that worked really, really well. I think that the way that it being told a little bit splicey, while not my favorite version of storytelling, does make sense as the story progresses and starts to kind of come together and be a little bit more cohesive. And the plot, while being very classic fantasy and not really adding anything super new and unique to the genre, was interesting and kept me engaged. The writing was well done. I felt like it was well edited and well written, and I had a lot of fun with it. I think that the things that did not work as much for me personally was plot felt like it was doing a lot and almost too much at times. We had elves, we had dwarves, we had djinn, we had humans, we had lake monsters, we had undead, we had gods, and it was just doing a lot of things, and I wish it had kind of honed in a little bit more, but it feels very Witcher in that way, that there's a lot of different things in this world and a lot of different things going on and we're off to slay the monsters. So in the fact that it didn't work as well for me with there being too much going on, if you are a classic fantasy fan, you might enjoy that aspect a little bit more than I did. There were a couple of points where the writing or the plot kind of shifted from third person point of view to first person point of view, and I know why it was in third person and I get why there were some first person thrown in there, but I wish it had just kind of stayed consistent and been the same manner of storytelling throughout the book. There were a couple of times where the plot got a little convoluted. I felt like there were a few plot holes or why are we doing this now versus doing this later kind of thing, but overall I really liked it. I liked the way everything came to an end. This is a true standalone fantasy, which I really enjoyed as well. You don't see that very often, and even though I do feel like it was a touch too long, there were points that really did start to drag, I do think overall it did the standalone fantasy well. This book does do one thing that I don't particularly love, and that is when the characters travel somewhere, meet someone, and word vomit all of the information that is necessary to them to solve the problem. And again, I think that that is because the type of story that this is, that's why it's done in that way, but I personally don't like that. I like when we travel somewhere and we learn something by investigating and having to figure things out. I don't like when the character goes, I know what to do, runs down to where they're supposed to gather things, and poof, somebody magically appears to give them all of the answers. Not really my favorite. It feels a little bit lazy to me, and this book did do that a couple of times, but it didn't bother me drastically. It just was something that kind of irritated me when I noticed it. So let's talk rating really quick for Oathsworn. I'm going to be giving the characters an 8. They grew on me. If you'd asked me the characters in the very beginning, I would have told you they were like a 6.5, but the brothers really grew on me, and the band that comes together really grew on me. I felt like in the end, when things happened, it did have an impact on me, and so I had to give the characters an 8. The plot is a 7.5. Again, that is because kind of the way that it is told and the fact that it did not feel super unique to me, but I did enjoy it. World building is a 7. Again, trying to do a little bit too much for my liking. Writing is an 8. I do think it was well written, despite those couple of instances and couple of things that I didn't love, like switching from third person to first person. And enjoyment, I think, is going to get an 8 as well, which results in a 7.75 and a very low 4-star for me, I think. A very high 3-star, low 4-star. I enjoyed this, and I think I would recommend it. If you are a classic fantasy fan, you're looking for a standalone fantasy just to sit down and have some fun with, you're a Witcher fan, I say try this. I say pick it up because I do think that it did what it did well. So now we are moving on to our next book. I think next up for me is going to be Dred. This is one of my shorter ones, and it's about a guy with a birthmark. That's really all I know, but I'm excited to jump into it. I wanted to give my first impressions on A Contract in Thorns. This is a different type of story than what I'm used to reading. So far, I'm about 15-20% of the way through. And we open with a prologue that is very interesting. It's written in second person, and it's you are developed from a thought, and then all of those thoughts become more thoughts, and you become a person. And then after the prologue, we split off, and we are introduced to a woman that is different from everybody else. And she's coming back from a quest and traveling to Thorns, where she has just been told that a friend of hers has passed away. And then we are also going to have, I believe, a different point of view from a lord, and I don't really know what's going on with him right now. I'm intrigued, but I'm not totally sure how I feel about it right now. The writing is very whimsical, very folklore type writing style. It's easy to read, but it definitely flows in a more unique way than what I'm used to. I like the djinn and kind of the magic that we got from that side of things. I wish it was a little bit better explained, but I am enjoying that part so far, and I'm very intrigued by that point of view. Our Lord's point of view, though, he's just an asshole and a very self-centered, and so I'm just not loving being in his perspective because I don't fully understand, I guess, right now what the point is. His point of view just seems a lot more like slice of life, and I'm kind of bored by that, courtly stuff, and his attitude toward the whole situation just makes me want to roll my eyes. But I'm excited to continue on with this. I'm hoping to read about a third of it a day, and I will definitely say the writing style lends itself to a quick read. I finished this one and did not love it as much as I was hoping to. I think this book does a lot of things well. I think it is well written, and it was very easy to read. It definitely has that folklore type syntax to it where it kind of just flows and ebbs throughout the story, and it's more of a storytelling type vibe. It also had a unique magic system. I found the djinn to be very interesting and how all of that works. So I think it did those things well. Unfortunately, though, I don't think that the magic or the world building was very fleshed out. The djinn and what we got in the beginning was very cool, but then it kind of just ebbed off to where we didn't really get a lot more information into the world and how this world works, why there were things at war, what was the elven war, how did the djinn play into this. She was the only one, and we keep mentioning elves, but then nothing ever was really told more about them. There kept being things mentioned like life energy and lacrine and the black water and all of these terms, but nothing I felt like was ever really fleshed out or gave me any backstory or any true depth into any of that magic and world building. And so that just did not work for me. On top of the fact that this is a very, very character driven story, it's mostly characters first, plot second. I liked Valen a lot. I think that her character was exactly what it was supposed to be, this traveler, this ancient being that kind of just goes and does what they're supposed to do and doesn't really truly understand human folk. But at the same time, for such a character-driven story, I expected there to be more depth to the characters. And if they didn't have a lot of depth in the beginning, I expected them to grow and to learn and to develop and get more depth. And I never really felt like that happened. Valen stayed very much so the same throughout the whole book, which, again, fine, that's what her character was supposed to be. And Doran, I just was expecting to grow and to develop a lot more than he did. This felt like a very moral to the story kind of book, and I just don't feel like we got there in the way that I was hoping that we would. And so with the characters falling a little flat, the world falling a little flat, and the plot being completely in the background, this just did not really work for me as well as I had hoped that it would. But like I said, I think it is well written. I think if you are a character-driven person that wants a very whimsical folklore type book that has a unique type of main character, a unique magic, I would try this one. I think it succeeds in what it's trying to do, but what it was trying to do didn't particularly work for me. So as far as ratings for this one goes, I'm gonna give the characters a 5. I felt like they were okay. There was nothing inherently wrong with the characters. I just wish that they had been a little bit more developed. The plot is going to get a 4. The plot was too much so in the background and never really made a lot of sense to me sometimes. There were points where I was like, okay, we're switching from this chapter where we're doing one thing, and then we switch to this chapter and we go back to what we were doing the chapter before that one, and it just felt very out of place in places, and so that was kind of hard for me to keep up with at times. The magic is gonna get a 5. I liked the world building and what we got of it. I just wish we had gotten more. I think that that's where this book really shone. I wanted to know more about the djinn and how they fed and how they sealed contracts and how this life energy flowed throughout the whole kingdom and what her role was. I wanted more of that. I thought that that was so interesting, but I didn't get as much of it as I had hoped. I think I was wanting different things from this book than what it was intending to be. The writing is going to get an 8. I thought that the writing was really well done, and enjoyment is going to get a 5.5 from me. I enjoyed it. I think I just have said this before. I wanted something a little bit different than what this book was giving. So overall, it is going to get a 5.5. I've also read a little bit of Dred. Let me switch out my camera battery really quickly and then we will go through my thoughts on that one. Okay, camera battery has been replaced, so we should be much better off now. I wish I had better news for this one, but Dred, unfortunately, I think is gonna be my first DNF. I just was not vibing with this one. The writing style is very formal and very like classic political type writing, and it's not bad. It just was hard for me to like read it. It was going kind of in one ear and out the other. I felt like the dialogue was extremely stilted because everyone was trying to be very proper, which is the style of when it was written. It's written in a very like classic in the castle historical style, so that made sense, but it just was harder for me because I didn't feel like I was really settling into the story. I did get about 25% of the way through this one, so I tried to give it a decent amount of time before I made the decision to put it down, but I did struggle some with the way that it was like referring to women. There was one female character, she was barely in it at all, and you could tell that she was just gonna kind of serve a purpose of giving us this like prophecy, and we were talking about women's bosoms and taking pleasure from them, but they didn't have any agency in the book, and that bothered me a little bit. I want a strong female character in my books when I can get it, and if I can't get it, if that's not what the book is striving to be or what the book is intending for out of its characters, that's fine, but I don't love it when they're objectified anyway. And again, it's probably going to be the argument that it's the time period and where and when this book was set, and that's fine, but everything kind of meshed together wasn't really working for me. I also found it to be pretty repetitive. I felt like we were getting the same information about this birthmark over and over and over again, and I was like, okay, well, I'm 25% in. I've got that set up. Now let's move on to the plot and what's going to happen, and let me start to see how this is going to progress, because it could have been a good like coming of age villain origin story type book, but I wasn't getting that in what I read of it. So for now, I'm gonna put it down. It's very possible that I could come back to it, and if I do, I will let you guys know. But at the moment, I just don't see this one working for me, so I decided that I was going to put it down. So I wanted to give you guys a quick update before I finish Magic in the Cards, because I blew through like 70% of this today. This gives me like Charmed vibes if Phoebe was an only child. There's just something about that that is fun. There's definitely moments that I'm not loving because the main character sometimes tries a little bit too hard. She's a little too quirky, or sometimes the dialogue will feel a little bit stilted and not very natural. But overall, I'm having a really good time with this. I went into it thinking it was a romantasy, but it is not. It's much more just like paranormal urban fantasy. And I assume there's going to be a romantic plot line at some point, but we haven't really gotten that at all in the first 70%. This is about Sunday, and she basically is a witch that does magic through cards, and it's essentially a tarot deck, but not a fully tarot deck. Like, they aren't practicing tarot, but the deck is the same. So there's like air magic, fire magic, water magic, and each card has a different role in magic. And in this world, the cartographers are able to open portals, and it's assumed that they were able to open portals and let in all of these like supernatural creatures into the human realm. So now we have normal present day, but people know about vampires and werewolves because they just showed up one day and they had to learn to deal with them. We are basically having a monster hunt because there is an elder or a really old vampire that is killing off people, and she is going to work with some of the other vampires in order to try to figure out what's going on and to catch this guy. There's definitely parts that I feel like we're lulling. We're talking about what we're having for breakfast, and there's a few like magic things that don't really make sense. intense, but overall, I'm having a pretty good time with it. Terribly sorry if you can hear the AC, but it is literally hot as crap in Alabama. If you walk outside, you're immediately going to start sweating. But last night I finished Magic in the Cards. Magic on the Cards. I keep saying that wrong. And I still had a really good time with this one. I think in the end, some of the like beboppy quirkiness of our main character got to me a little bit. It felt like she was trying a little bit too hard to be different. But overall, I still had fun with this book. I think that there was definitely a lot of development that could have happened, both in the characters, the plot, and the magic. But it was just a good time. Like I said, it kind of reminded me of a Charmed episode. It was a super fast read. I literally read it all in one day. So let's talk rating really quickly. Characters, I'm going to give a 6. I think that the characters really needed to be a lot more developed. Ariel was one of the side characters, and she really didn't seem to have much of a point. So I hope that in the future books in the series, I don't know if I'll read them, but I would hope that she would get a little bit more of a purpose, because she was just too much and didn't really like serve any purpose to the story. And I just wish that the relationships between the characters had a lot more depth. I think this is intended to be a romantasy, but there really wasn't any depth to those relationships. But I did find that she did a pretty good job with some of the other side characters and their relationships. And then for the plot, I'm going to give that a 6.5, I think. I liked the plot. It was a little murder mystery, a little like whodunit type vibes, but I definitely think that it could have been a little bit more developed. The magic is going to get a 7. I thought the magic was really interesting, and that is one thing that I think did continue to develop throughout the story. She did a good job with like giving you hints of the magic, but making sure that you understood the lore as we went through the story, which I really appreciated. The writing, I'm also going to give a 7. I think that the writing was good, and enjoyment is going to get a 7. I had a lot of fun with this book. So overall, that comes out to a 6.75, a very solid read for me. Next up, I think is going to be A Burden to Bear. This is like a Norse book, and I read the just author's note in the very, very beginning last night. I didn't actually start the book. I appreciate that he knew what he wanted to read. Like, he was like, this is what I want, and I can't find it, so I'm just going to write one. I really like that, and I think that it's going to lend to a book with purpose, and I'm very hopeful to see how that translates. Sadly, I think we are going to have our second DNF of this vlog. It's going to be A Burden to Bear, not because I think this is a bad book, but it is a very not Mel book. So remember, the way that Cassidy's team works is there are 2 of us reading this for this exact reason. If you just have a book that's not for you and not to your taste, there's still a chance, that somebody else would love it. And I even put out there, like, if anyone loves Norse settings, then please pick this up. I just think that it was not my cup of tea. I think that generally the writing was well done, although for the most part, it just felt like we were trying a little too hard in places. There was definitely a underlying of like humor and trying to be quirky, but occasionally it felt like the writing was trying too hard to like set the stage, and it was a little overwritten at times. However, I would not call this a flowery writing style. I don't think that it was flowery. I think it just sometimes over told us about the scene, and so I would get a little like lost in that and be like, wait, what are we actually trying to accomplish right now? So the plot felt a little bit jumbled, in my opinion, where we were flipping between chapters, but I didn't really feel the blend from one chapter to the other. However, I think that this author is doing exactly what he set out to do. He wanted to write a Norse adventure story, very reminiscent of Beowulf, but with a little humor, and I can absolutely see that and appreciate that. It's just not going to be the book for me. Rather than reading it and giving it a low rating, I decided to put it down and recommend that someone else on my team read it, because I think that it definitely is going to have its audience. That audience is just not gonna be me. I'm not a super like humor person in my books unless it's extremely sarcastic. You definitely can tell a lot of the humor is like things that, I don't know, men seem to like in humor. Again, that's stereotyping, but I think you'll know what I mean. I don't have any other way to describe it. Yeah, for now, this one's going to be a put down for me, and hopefully somebody else on the team will read it and absolutely love it. I finally made it about 15% into Blood of Houses, And at first, I was really unsure about this one. For one, it's like 930 pages long, which in anything is way too long. And I was just like, man, it is taking me forever to get from 1% to 3%. As we've continued on, I've really started to enjoy it more. There were a couple of things in the beginning that were just completely taking me out of the story, and there's still a few things that'll occasionally throw me off. Like he says dagger, but then describes it as a gun. But a dagger is supposed to be like a knife, so when we're shooting things, it just didn't really like mesh into the story very well. And this particular story feels more like Asian inspired. We have lightsabers, and so just to have like a flintlock thing in the prologue didn't really work for me. And I think that's the main thing that I'm having issues with in this book right now is the elements don't seem to mesh together super well. They're elements that I really like, but I do feel like they need to be a little bit more seamlessly meshed together. You may or may not have read these books to understand the comparison, but I feel like we've got a little bit of Jade City with the like two houses warring against one another, sibling dynamics, politics kind of thing. And then we've got a little bit of like Malice by John Gwynne and like the military type fantasy and lots of different points of view. And then a little bit of Ashes of the Sun and kind of the way that the magic style works. So all of those things thoroughly enjoy. I just wish they were being meshed together a little bit better. I do think there's a few too many points of views, at least right now, because the world is kind of one of those where you're thrown in, you're just completely dumped in and have to figure it out. But I want there to be a little bit more explanation into how all of this works, because I don't feel like I have a great understanding of the culture right now, and that is really important and talked about quite a lot. This like, well, per our culture, and I'm like, okay, well, you're gonna have to tell me a little bit more about what this culture is in order for me to understand it. But overall, I think that the bones of the story are really good so far, and I am excited to continue and see how it progresses throughout the rest of the book. I'm a little bit nervous about how long it is though, not gonna lie. So we're gonna ignore how tired I look right now. It's been a long week, but we are coming to the end of the week. I did make it a little over halfway into Blood of Houses though, and I wanted to give you guys another quick update on that one. I am still enjoying this book, but I do feel like the middle has lulled a little bit for me. Once I hit part 2, I felt like the action and kind of the plot forward movement that we were having really slowed down, and we spent a lot more time on the day-to-day type things of the characters. And I am not quite as intrigued and as engaged as I was before. I'm hoping it's just kind of the middle slump, because this is a 1,000-page book, so it stands to reason that it would have a little bit of a slump in the middle. But I wish that it wasn't this long. I don't think it needs to be this long, and that would tighten up a lot of the story. I also feel like I don't really understand the magic system still. We're getting snippets and we kind of understand it, but I feel like it's just almost offhandedly discussed, and the core of the story is more the relationships between the two houses and their like dynamic and feud, rather than the magic system itself. But then I also get the sense that the magic system is supposed to be a pretty forward focus, so I don't really know what the dynamic is on that. And I do wish that the plot was a little bit more interwoven. We, at the end of the first part, we bring up the fact that there's going to be another big bad, and then we just don't really mention it again. And I'm like, wait, can we, like, where did that go? Why are we not talking about that still? And we go back to kind of the feuding between the two houses. And I wish that I understood the motivations between the feud a little bit better. It almost seems like it's just something that has always been. It's a war that has always been. And if that's the case, that's fine. I just want there to be a little bit more lore and it talked about a little bit more, because I find my interest waning when I don't know as many details. Maybe that's just a me thing, but I am liking it. I still think it's pretty well written. There are a couple of times where the word choices I'm like, but overall, like, that's a very minor thing. And for the fact that it is so long, I'm getting through it really quickly. I feel like it's easy to sink into, easy to read, and I don't mind picking it back up again, which is always a good sign. I'm trying to get somewhere where you can't hear my cat crunching, because she decided that the time when I was going to film the clip was the perfect time for her to have dinner. I have finished Blood of Houses, and I ended up liking the ending of this one, but overall I felt like the further I read, the more that I had struggles with it. I think that this has some great ideas to it. I think it has some really fun, unique ideas. It's a little sci-fi, a little bit fantasy. I stand by the comparisons that I made for kind of the vibes of this book in the beginning clips when I started reading it. I do think it had some really solid characters, some that I was really interested in, and I liked the like dynamics between the two houses. I thought that was really cool and really well done. Felt kind of like a mobster, or I don't know, one of like an episode of TV where you have two warring houses and star-crossed lovers kind of thing. So I did really enjoy that. I thought that was really well done. I really liked the first like 40-ish% until we hit part 2, and part 2 is where I really started to struggle. The pacing felt like it slowed down almost too much. We got a lot of slice of life, and I started to feel like the characters did not really feel like them anymore. The characters that we had gotten to know in the beginning half of the book seemed to be making choices that didn't feel like themselves, and then the verbiage started to change where we were using more slang and things that just didn't really fit the vibe of the book that wasn't there in the beginning. So everything just kind of did a weird shift when we hit part 2, and I had a hard time at that point. I did like the ending that we finally got the plot that we were promised in the beginning, and it is definitely a series, so it did end on not a cliffhanger, but a little bit of a like open-ended note. So I think for the rating on this one, the characters I'm going to give a 6. A couple of reasons. There were some that I really liked. I liked Seva, I liked Rome, I liked Sidon. I thought that he was a fascinating character, kind of crazy but fascinating. But overall, I felt like there were way too many characters to keep track of, and we were introduced to even more and had another point of view introduced in part 2, and I just felt like it was a lot to keep track of. And then, like I said, their personalities seemed to change in a lot of ways. Shansha was one of my favorite characters in the first half of the book, and in the second half things just took a turn, and you know, some of the things that Jace was doing, it just did not really make sense to me. And so for that reason, I think I'm going to give it a 6. The plot is also going to get a 6. There were a lot of things that I liked about it, the warring houses that I mentioned, but overall I felt like it just never really honed in on what it wanted to be, and some of the pacing issues were definitely a problem for me. The world building, I'm also going to give a 6. I liked the ideas. I just think that there were way too many of them. Like I said, we had a sci-fi element, and then we had these, you know, lightsaber-like things, but then we had magic, and it just never really felt very fleshed out, in my opinion. I really enjoyed the ideas. I think that they were great. I just needed more information on them, and I think I needed it to hone in a little bit on the ideas and not have quite so many. The writing, I'm also going to give a 6. I am docking a few points for things just kind of feeling a little unnatural to me, especially the further we went into the book. But overall, I liked the writing style. I thought that it was pretty well done, and it was an easy, enjoyable read. And then for enjoyment, I'm going to give it a 6 as well. I enjoyed it, and so overall, this is going to come out to a 6 even on my scores. Now we are down to the final book. All I have left is The Outer Darkness by M.V. Prindle, and then we are going to be announcing my semi-finalist for Cassidy. I cannot believe that we are almost to the end of these 10 books. Okay, hopefully I can keep this camera still because I have a puppy dog in my lap and I cannot move to film this vlog clip. But I've gotten 28-ish% into The Outer Darkness by M.V. Prindle. This is a very interesting concept. We have this darkness that is like basically bordering all of the lands from what I understand. And there is the, oh, puppy dog is leaving. Okay. There is the like goddess of light that made a sacrifice, and all of her power has been protecting the realm from true night and from darkness for as long as anyone can remember. We're following a bunch of different points of view. One is a priestess, and her temple has fallen, and she is on the last mission from like the temple priest, head priest or whatever. A guy that has been down in his luck, things are not going his way, he's an alcoholic and he's really been struggling, and he is given a task from the god of thieves in order to steal something from the goddess of light. We also have a shadow hunter, which is like a warrior, and then we have a guy that is joined like the police essentially and is helping to try to solve a mass murder. So a lot of stuff going on in this book in the first 20-25%. I like it. I feel like it is a little bit convoluted where I'm having somewhat of a hard time following not the characters and what they're doing, but kind of all of the lore and shifting and things like that that is happening in the background. It very much so just dumps you in, and the way that the beginning of the book is done, it kind of just drops you in and then we go. We don't really spend a lot of time getting to know the characters. We don't spend a lot of time getting to know them or their backstories or the world's backstory or the magic system or anything like that, which is a little hard because I feel like I don't fully understand the characters. I don't feel like I fully understand their motivations, and I'm having a hard time with like the magic system and the lore. However, it is getting sprinkled throughout the book, so I am starting to learn things and I'm enjoying learning things. There are times where the dialogue has been really stilted and not my favorite, but I'm wondering if it's just per certain characters and the way that they're supposed to talk, which is a choice I don't like, but a choice nevertheless, because it takes me out of the book every time it happens when we have one character over here kind of bebopping and slang, and then we have another character over here that's being like super formal and stilted. The two styles just don't mesh very well. Even if it is a choice of the characters' personalities, I still don't love it. But I have found a character that I absolutely love. Disastrous the Imp is like amazing. I am cackling over his stuff. He is just a little murder imp and I love him so much. He's incredible. So if I could just read all of the chapters with Disastrous the Imp in them, I would be sad. That is definitely my favorite point of view right now, Anya the Priestess, and it's because we're learning the most about the world and the magic in her point of view, I think. And we have the Imp. The Imp is incredible. But I need to continue reading. I've still got about 5-10% of my goal left for today. Probably won't check in with you guys again until I'm finished with it, but I'm excited to see how it goes because so far I'm really enjoying this. And just like that, I have completed my last read of SPFBO10, and I am so happy with the way this batch turned out. But before we get into all of that semi-finalist, let's talk about the end of the Outer Darkness. I ended up really enjoying this one. I thought it had a lot of really cool ideas, some interesting characters, a very unique setting. I really liked the way that it progressed, and I really enjoyed the way that it ended. I felt like there were a couple of little things that weren't my absolute favorite, or I felt like could have been better. Mostly, I just really think this should have been a duology, honestly. I think that there was a little too much to pack into one book, and it made it 700 pages, but also still felt like it lacked some depth in a lot of areas that I wanted, like the world building, the magic, and all of that. So I just feel like it would have been better for it to be a duology, and that way all of that could have been expanded upon while also not making it 1,000 pages and cutting down on the length and making that maybe a little bit more friendly as well. But overall, I really enjoyed it. So let's chat about my rating really quickly. The characters are going to get a 7.5. Really enjoyed the characters. Disastrous the Imp was one of my favorites. I just wish he had been in it a little bit more, and he kind of lost that like murdery personality that I loved as we continued on. I just felt like the characters needed some more depth. There were a lot of them, a lot of voices on the page, and they just didn't really get enough time because of that to fully flesh them out. But what we did get, I enjoyed. The plot, I'm gonna give an 8. I thought the plot was really fun. It was not overly like the most unique thing that I've ever read, but there was definitely a very unique twist on it, and I liked the way it ended a lot. Not a lot of books are willing to kind of do that and go there, and I really appreciated the way that it ended. The world building, I'm gonna give a 7.5, I think, 7 to 7.5. I just really feel like this is where we could have expanded. The ideas were so good and so much fun. We had gods, we had this devouring outer darkness that was a prison. We had imps and trolls and all of these monsters, creatures, and I felt like that was so cool, but I never really fully understood the world. I never felt like I was in the world, and I think that it just, if it had been expanded on, I would have completely fallen in love with it. The writing, I'm also going to give a 7 to a 7.5. There were a couple of times where the writing felt a little jumbled, a little stilted, where I was like, wait, what are we trying to say? And a few times where I felt like I was being told stuff and rather than like shown it, so I was being over explained. But as a general rule, I thought the writing was really solid. I flew through this book. I read the 700-page book in literally well, probably more like 2.5 days. So very easy to read, very accessible style that I think a lot of people will really enjoy. And then enjoyment, I'm gonna give an 8. I enjoyed this quite a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to pick up more from this author in the future. So overall, that is going to get a 7.75 from me. And that's it. That's my last book. So the next time you guys see me, we will be talking about which book is going to be my semi-finalist, moving on for Cassidy to judge and decide upon a finalist. Okay, and with that, it is time to announce my semi-finalist. Just a quick reminder about how Cassidy's team works. Each of us gets 10 books, but there are 6 of us, so there are 2 people reading every single book. So even though I am picking a semi-finalist first, doesn't mean it can't be picked as a semi-finalist again, because that's what happened last year. And second, it means that none of the books that aren't moving forward as my semi-finalist are out of the running. They will only be cut once the second person has read it and decided it won't be one of their semi-finalists. So I will leave the links to everybody's channels down in my description box in case you are not already following them, and that way you can check out all of their vlogs to see what books are going to be their semi-finalist and what is moving forward. This was actually a lot harder for me than I thought it would be. I do have one that I know I'm putting forward as a semi-finalist, but there are actually 2 others that I'm like throwing out there to the team and being like, hey, I want you guys to pick these up. If you don't have something that you think needs to be moved forward, then please read one of these 2 books, because I think that they are really good. So those 2 are going to be the Oathsworn Legacy and the Outer Darkness. I think they were really good. They're not going to be my semi-finalist, but I'm hoping that someone else on the team reads them and really enjoys them. As far as my semi-finalist goes though, let's get a drum roll. Drum roll, please. My semi-finalist is going to be Blood of the Stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a great kind of young adult coming of age fantasy, had some really cool ideas. You could tell that the author really knew what they wanted out of the story and have laid a great foundation for the remainder books in the series. I just had a lot of fun with it, and I think Cassidy will too. So I'm going to be pushing that one forward as my semi-finalist. Congratulations, and I hope that everyone really enjoys it as much as I did. Okay guys, so that is going to be the end of this vlog. I think we have chatted long enough. If you are interested in reading any of these books, or if you plan to pick any of them up, please let me know which ones down in the comments below. I would love to chat with you about them. And if you just want to let me know that you were here hanging out, leave me an arrow, a star, something that is in congratulations to Blood of the Stars down in the comments below. If you want to check out some of my vlogs from last year's SPFBO, I will leave those up here for you guys. As always, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all in the description box below. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!